Thanks for joining us and welcome to the Finance and Investment Committee meeting of Vallecitos Water District on Monday, April 26th, 2021 at 2 p.m. Via video conference. I'm going to read a quick notice to the public for anybody who joins us. Due to the evolving situation with the COVID-19 novel coronavirus, so long as state or local public officials have imposed or recommended social distancing measures, Vallecitos Water District will hold future meetings via teleconferencing and allow members of the public to observe and address the meeting telephonically or otherwise electronically. During this period of time, Vallecitos Water District will not be making any physical location available for members of the public to observe the meeting and offer public comment. The public is encouraged to watch and participate in the meeting from the safety of their homes. The meeting can be viewed on the agenda page located on the main page of the district's website. Public comments or questions can be submitted to the following email address, publiccomments@vwd.org. All written comments that are received 90 minutes before the meeting will be provided to the committee members, and a record of the receipt of comment will be noted during the meeting. Members of the public viewing the meeting via Zoom video conferencing platform can express their desire to provide input at the appropriate time by utilizing the raised hand function. Additional instructions for online participation will be posted on the district's website at www.vwd.org/meetings. Okay, we'll go ahead and call us to order. Since it's a committee meeting, we don't need to do a roll call. Is there any public comment that was provided before the meeting, Glenn?
I did not receive any emails for public comment. We do have one member of the public in attendance today. It's Ms. Gail Martin.
Okay, great. Let's go ahead and kick off with item number 1.
Yeah, maybe I'll just say a few words before I hand it over. So we have 2 items on today's agenda, and both of them will involve the participation of consultants or outside parties to help guide the conversation. We've tried to estimate the amount of time each will take, but it's likely we'll be off by a little bit. So the first item is the subject of debt issuance. And I noticed on the agenda, it's misspelled, but it's debt issuance. And the second relates to the cost of service study. We've asked the cost of service study consultants to join us at 2:45. We may not be done with the debt discussion by that point in time, but our cost of service study consultants will stand by until we're ready for them. So we'll start with the item regarding debt issuance first. I'll just say a few words and I'll turn it over to Wes. But so debt it's a common tool for public agencies to use to finance their costly infrastructure projects. And we have mentioned at several of the Finance Committee meetings before that it's something that we were considering. So the purpose of the meeting today is to give the Finance Committee members a little bit better understanding of what's involved in the debt issuance process and give a kind of rough order of magnitude of what the cost might be, excuse me. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Wes and he'll start the conversation and he can introduce our guests today and then turn it over to them as appropriate. So Wes, why don't you take it away?
Good afternoon. So as you know, we've mentioned debt issuance on several occasions. It was in our approved budget for FY21 and it was included in the 2022 5-year plan. So we've talked about this, it was a placeholder then at $10 million. We talked about the rates being at record lows. And we've also said that we were in conversations with our financial advisors and our bond counsel and talking about the options, what the rates might be, financing possibilities, and the fact that we have an excellent credit rating in AA+. So this is the next step in that conversation. So we're looking at our draft proposed budget and the amount of debt that we may consider issuing. And we wanted to bring that to the committee and give you more information about the environment, types of debt and other areas like that. So today we have our financial advisors with us and our bond counsel in straddling, and that's Douglas Brown. Financial advisors are Robert Poor and Laura Carpenter. They will be presenting today and going over what the rates are, what the environment is, and options to Vallecitos. So with that, I will turn it over to Laura.
Thank you very much, Wes. I appreciate the introductions. Good afternoon, committee members. It's a pleasure to be here virtually with you, and I look forward to presenting the topic before you today. Bonds is always a very serious topic when discussing whether or not is the right choice and the right position of the district to move forward with it. But I'm pleased that the slides we've shown here today will give you at least an introduction to what exactly bonds are, as well as what it means to the district to finance these bonds, and for what purposes and reasons do other issuers go down this path as well. First and foremost, like I said, we'll be going over introduction of what bonds are. I'll give you some general feedback of the market and where we've seen it today or last week, as well as what has happened since the COVID pandemic started back in March of 2020. I'll go over exactly some of the scheduling that goes into issuing bonds, as well as the key finance participants and the consultants that you'll be using on a bond issuance. And last but not least, we will go over exactly what types of costs may be incurred by the district based off current market conditions. So first and foremost, bonds is a type of security that municipalities issue in the capital public markets. They can be issued to refinance existing debt outstanding, or they can be issued to obtain funds for needed capital projects and needed infrastructure. Unlike a mortgage, where you have to work with one financial institution, one bank, and generally with only one interest rate, how a bond is structured is you have individual maturities that range from year 1 through year 30. Each of these terms has a different yield associated with it, which also associates with multiple different investor opportunity to look at the types of bonds, the types of coupons and rates that you're structuring in order to understand when you go to the markets, what types of investors might be willing to purchase your bonds. The way a bond works is at the time of the sale, at the time of the closing, the district will receive the funds. They'll receive a large cash payment, either, like I said before, to refinance existing debts or to receive the necessary capital improvement project funds that will be used to, over an extended period of time, to fund the infrastructure needs. In return for this cash payment, the district will be repaying that debt over a repayment term that generally lasts between 20 or 30 years of principal plus interest over the length of the bond. Typically, when issuing for new money for capital infrastructure projects, municipalities will match the life or the term of the bonds with the useful life of the asset being financed. What that helps to do is it helps to not only take the cost of a project and smooth it out over a long period of time, but also allows the customers and the ratepayers of the district to take advantage not only of the benefit of the new project, but also of the cost burden over the useful life of that asset. And as I said, these types of capital projects being issued by municipalities for water and sewer agencies, that term usually is between 20 and 30 years. In terms of the bond repayments, the district will be issuing bonds and securing them through general commodity revenue. So the customer servicing of your water services, those revenues received will be dedicated to the payment of those principal and interest over the life of the bonds. And this will be the similar security to what the existing bondholders have for the district's outstanding 2015 bond issuance. The goal of issuing debt in the public market is to try to acquire the lowest cost to the district, therefore acquiring the lowest debt service payments that will need to be financed by the ratepayers over the life of the term. Some of the questions you may ask is, well, what types of costs are we seeing today? Where has the market been moving? And what is the all-in cost the district might be realizing for a type of a 30-year bond issuance? What I've shown here on this slide is the depiction of different yield curves. For example, the S&P or the equity market uses the S&P 500 as a benchmark. Municipalities for tax-exempt issuances uses the AAA MMD yield curve or the municipal market data curve. The chart you see at the top of your screen outlines 3 separate curves, all from 3 separate times in the past 5 years. The red curve you see covers every maturity that you may be issuing from 1 to year 30, how that looked in 2016, 5 years ago. And when you compare that to where the market currently is, either now as of April 16th or even a year ago, during the midst of right when the pandemic started, April of 2020, you'll see how that curve has dropped line by line for those other two periods of times. So you do see a significant drop in where yields are, or the benchmark yield is currently acquiring those data marks or those yields. Another way to look at this is the bottom charts below on this slide, where we've depicted on the same graph a 10-year, so it's just the 10-year yield compared to the 30-year yield, and where those rates have been since January of 2020. That large spike you see right after March indicates where the interest rate market increased dramatically due to the start of the pandemic and the close of the global markets, as well as the restrictions that we had day to day in our lifestyles. You see general volatility since March of 2020. What I did want to point your attention to is right in the beginning of late March and late February, early March 2021, you see that both the 30 and the 10-year yields did have slight of an uptick. We did see market interest rates increase about 40 basis points or 0.4% in that time. But since then, you'll see a slight dip in the beginning of April where yields have started to come back down in relation to its general maturity in terms and yields. All this is to say is we're still in a generally favorable market with generally low interest rates. And this chart depicts that a little bit better. What we're showing here is on the very, very bottom axis line of the graph, each maturity of the benchmark yield curve, years 1 through 30. And we've shown inside the actual curve itself where those yields were as of April 16th. Since 1998, the yield curve that you're seeing before you today, as of April 16th, has only been lower 1.2% of the time on average since 13, 14 years over to the 30-year yield curve. That is to say, over 99% of the time in the past over 20 years, the yield has been higher. We're still in a generally low interest rate market, which is good news for anybody who's looking to issue long-term debt over a long repayment period between 20 or 30 years. What we have here on this slide is some of the identified capital costs the district is looking to finance. Currently, we're looking at a minimum financing amount for new capital projects and prior incurred costs for other capital project costs of about $25 million. You'll see the first chart on this graph identifies some of the capital projects where money has already been spent down over the past 5 years. And we've also identified some additional funds over the next 3-year period where some capital projects might need to be funded and further, or infrastructure will be needed to fund it further. When we talked about the range of potential financing costs, we were told that new project costs might range anywhere from 25 to 30 million. So we wanted to give you a general flavor of what that type of cost will be in terms of a 30-year issuance for the district. What I did want to note as well is that since part of these project proceeds, the funds received when issuing debt will be used to reimburse the district for money already spent on projects. Tax Council is currently looking at the analysis of the types of projects where the money was spent, the time those projects were spent, as well as when those reimbursement resolutions the district authorized, how that timing works out, and if the district can use those funds to issue a tax-exempt issuance to reimburse yourself. We're working through that analysis currently, and we expect to have further detail back to you and the board down the road. If the district is looking to finance between 25 and 40 million, I wanted to draw your eyes towards the very bottom chart here, where we've identified the total debt service cost, which is principal plus interest over the life of a 30-year term, and what that looks like on both an annual debt service basis, as well as the total cost, the total borrowing cost to the district. If the district wanted to issue only $25 million in new capital funds, that would result in about $38 million of total debt service, or annually principal plus interest of 1.255. If you were to compare that to a higher debt issuance of about $40 million in capital proceeds, that would increase the total debt service cost to about $60.6 million and increase the total annual debt service by about $1.9 million. So the higher proceeds or the higher amount of funds you need On this analysis, based off current market conditions from last week, would increase annual debt service by almost $744,000 and increase total debt service by $22.6 million. These cost figures assume the bonds are outstanding for the full 30 years. What is also important to note is anytime you issue in the public market, municipalities can also use a call feature. Generally, this call feature, which allows a district to refinance for lower interest rates if the market allows, is about a 10-year period. So you usually have a 10-year lockout, and then you can reevaluate the market and actually go back into the public markets to refinance your debt at a lower cost, similar to refinancing your mortgage.
Laura, I have a question.
Sure.
So I understand, the total maximum annual debt service, these two lines here. Can you help explain to me these figures? So these would, in theory, add an additional 1.2 to 1.9 to each year over year budget, because we would have to service the debt year over year. So we're looking at that much of a budget increase just right out of the gate, right? I just want to make sure I'm understanding that correctly.
That's exactly right, Director. Yes, these represent new principal and interest payments that is above and beyond what is the current allocation of debt the district already pays in the 2015 debt. So that's correct. It'd be increases to the budget.
But are there any savings on sort of I'm not going to ask this question in a way that's very good, but are we saving any money by doing that? So it's not, our budget goes up every year, and we can expect that because the cost of things goes up every year. So are we not looking at sort of a minimum of these numbers increase, or is it a little more complicated than that, and that there might be some reductions too? I'm sorry, my kids are in the background.
Not a problem. A very good question, Director. There are multiple different ways that you can structure the debt service. If you want to see lower payments up front, you can structure interest only. That does not include any principal amortization, and that can be purely a financial structure methodology to use when forecasting out your projected debt service payments in connection with where you think the revenue will come over the forecasted 5, 10, 15 years, which we've actually prepared here on this second slide, where you have different options for structuring debt service. It doesn't necessarily have to be the same 1.2 million or 1.9 million every single year. What you can take into account when structuring new debt is what you already have outstanding. What are the ratepayers already paying on an annual basis? And what exactly is the revenue based off the current rate adjustments and the current rate study? What are we projecting that revenue to be over the next 5-year periods? How can we optimize that structure in order to give the lowest cost to district ratepayers? And some of that optionality I've shown here on this slide, where option 1 is the very first chart, which relates to that 1.255 annual million dollars a year, where you can structure it as equal level payments every year through the final maturity through the 30-year period. Alternatively, as you see, there is a 2015 bond outstanding where it does dip in fiscal year 2032. You see a slight decrease of how much debt service payments the district will be paying to its bondholders. And we can take advantage of that dip and actually structure your payments to be interest only, reducing what you pay upfront on the 2021 bonds, increasing that bond between the payments for the years 2032 to 2036. So you're only having a budget that is level. So every year you are trying to levelize the annual payments to approximately $5 million through the final maturity of the 2015 bonds, and then actually able to reduce those payments starting in fiscal year 2037 thereafter. And that actually on an overall total debt service basis does reduce the total cost to the district by almost $3 million or $2.8 million. Does that help to answer your question, Director? And so what we will work with the district and their staff with, as well as the directors, is to try and optimize the amount of funding needed to look at the projections that are being prepared by staff, understand where those coverage results are in order to not only maintain your very strong credit rating, AA+, but also to keep those costs low for district ratepayers and to keep your financial pro forma strong going forward.
And Director, this is Robert Poor. I just want to dovetail in with what Laura's talking about. New money versus the reimbursement. So by borrowing for the new money, you get to spread out your repayment for those capital projects over a longer period of time. It should match the useful life of the projects, but it allows you, rather than raising $25 million off the rates and, increasing your rates significantly over the next few years to pay for the capital projects from reserves or dollars coming into the district rather than debt, it just allows you to keep your rates more stable over a longer period of time. So hopefully that helps with your question, Director.
Thank you very much, Robert. If there are no further questions at this time, what I wanted to go over next is who are your confidants in this process? Who are your consultants that will help you go from start to finish in issuing a bond, pricing the bond, and closing the bonds?
I think Wes has a question before you move on.
Sure.
Quickly, his hand's up.
I don't think Wes's mic's working.
Can't hear you, Wes. Still doesn't.
So then I start talking and I'm on mute. We'll go ahead and continue. And then if we get Wes back, then we'll certainly hear him out.
Okay, great. So what we've done on this slide is identify some key participants in the bond issuance process. First and foremost is your financial advisor, which will be Robert and myself. We are from Fielman Roll Associates. We've been your FA for many years, as well as assisted the district back in 2015 with its bond financing. We are at your beck and call for anything. We are your fiduciary. So during this process, we will associate and communicate with all other parties in this bond issuance transactions. We assist not only with reviewing all the legal documents, but also reviewing the financial pro formas presented by Fitch or presented by the district to the rating agencies. We help with the entire rating agency process and discussing the district's credit and obtaining a new bond rating on the bonds that are estimated to be issued at a later date. We also will go forward and review with the underwriter on the transaction when they are selected. We look through the entire pricing process and we help the district along the way through pricing and closing to make sure the district acquires the best possible interest rates and yields that they can at the day in the market, the day of pricing. There are your legal team, which is Stradling, Elka, Carlson, and Ralph. They will be your bond and disclosure counsel. Bond counsel is preparing the legal documentation that holds all the covenants that the district would adhere to for the bondholders. It goes over the relationship between the district and the trustee. The trustee is the bank who holds all the accounts and assists the district with making the payments, the principal and interest payments on the bonds, and they send those payments to the bondholders. The legal documentation is also prepared in order to adhere to certain covenants, as well as identify the certain call features of the bonds going forward. The disclosure counsel, also by Stradling, Jochen, Carlson, and Ralph, will be preparing the material information needed to disclose to the market, not only the district's overall credit, but also the district's water supply history, the number of connections, the types of customers, and the types of revenues received from the customers to maintain and operate the water system. We'll be looking at, in this disclosure document, the past 5 years of historical performance, and also be preparing for bondholders and for the rating agencies a pro forma, so a financial operation or a cash flow basis of where the district expects their operations to be over the next 5-year period. This is a very important document that is used by the underwriters to market the district's bonds on the day of sale, and actually almost a week prior to pricing is when the district or the underwriter on behalf of the district will be communicating with potential investors. Which leads me to who the underwriter is. They are an investment banking firm that will be purchasing the bonds from the district and selling it to the investors. These are the investors that will be providing the cash flow or the initial capital funding needs of the district. And in return, the district will be repaying principal and interest to these bondholders over the life of the debt. I've run over briefly the other consultants, the other parties, which is the rating agency. As Wes mentioned, the district is currently rated by both Fitch and S&P at AA+. This is a very strong credit rating. The highest credit rating that a municipality can have is AAA. And the higher the credit rating, usually and typically, the lower the interest rate the district can actually generate for the bond issuance when pricing it in the market. So AA+ is a very strong rating that we look to maintain and to keep when structuring and issuing new debt going forward.
Laura, I have another question. It might actually be a question for General Manager Pruitt. Looking at this finance team, and I understand that we're going to bring in, a series of outside experts to help us with this. Are there any folks in this finance team that overlap with other consultants that we are currently using that we don't need duplicate? We don't need duplicate roles.
I don't believe so, and I'll look more to Wes on this. He helps with all the finance stuff, but I don't believe anybody in this team is duplicative of any efforts that we currently have underway. Wes?
That's correct. Can you hear me now? Hopefully I got my mic working. Yeah, all right.
Yeah.
No, that's correct. Nobody here is duplicative. Feldman Roll-Up are specifically our financial advisors, and this is one of their main purposes. They also do our debt disclosure, but as far as issuing debt, this is the team.
Great question, thank you. And in terms of the team, I know another high priority question is how much does the bond issuance typically cost? What we've outlined here is a total not to exceed amounts for all of the consultant fees, the fee that it would cost to issue with 2 credit ratings on the bonds, and some of the other miscellaneous fees that go along with it. We've estimated a not to exceed of about $225,000 for the bond issuance, and all of the bond fees and debt service costs that I've been quoting through this course of the presentation, it includes any of the costs that go in towards producing a bond. What we have not shown in the cost structure right below is the underwriting fee. This is a separate fee that is purely based off of the underwriter's compensation and is based off the par amount. So they get compensated per every 1,000 bonds. And depending on what that fee will be, it can range anywhere from $40,000 to $125,000, depending on how much bonds are being issued and what the agreed upon compensation is. What staff has recommended in order to acquire and attain an underwriter is to go through a competitive RFP process. So to issue requests for proposals from highly qualified investment bankings to not only prepare and present their own qualifications to be the underwriter for the district, but also to prepare a fee schedule. So where do they anticipate the fees to be, which will allow the district to look at a competitive basis, what those fees are in the general market, and hopefully get the lowest cost for your district ratepayers.
Hey, Laura, this is Glenn. I have a quick question to make sure we all understand. So the table at the bottom, is that independent of the amount of the bonds issued? So you gave the examples before, anything between 25 and 40 million. So was this based on either of those two, or are those independent of the amount?
That's a great question. The credit ratings will be the only other fee that is dependent on the par amount. So the higher par that you issue will result in a slightly higher rating fee. The fees you see below you today, I believe they're ranging for pars up to 49 million. So it should be enough to meet the $40 million capital need should the committee and board decide to pursue the higher amount. But the credit rating agencies are dependent on par amount as well.
Thank you.
In terms of beginning and finishing a bond issuance, we've outlined here some key steps that the district consultant team, as well as the district staff, as well as the board will be taking over the course of this financing. Following the recommendation to proceed and following board approval, we'll be conducting behind the scenes the actual legal documentation work. So Stradling will be preparing legal documentation as well as the disclosure document for staff's input as well as consultant inputs. From there, we'll be bringing back before the board for approval in the next 2 months or so the near final completion of those documents that will also outline certain key covenants as well as thresholds. The resolution that will go before the board will give maximum par amounts as well as maximum fee structures and yields and true interest costs that the district board does not want to go over when issuing these types of debt. So you will be seeing that going forward on how the bonds are structured. We will also be working behind the scenes with district staff to identify a credit rating strategy, present the ratings to the credit rating agencies, and receive a rating on or around the time the board approves the documents. This puts us in a good position to be ready to go out to market. Following board approval of the documents, as well as the credit rating, we'll be taking and posting the disclosure document to the market, allowing the underwriter to proceed with pre-marketing the bonds. And then following that 1 to 2 week period, the district will be pricing the bonds and then closing about a week or 2 weeks later. I did want to reiterate, as I noted before, during the upfront work of this project or the bond financing will be to issue an RFP and acquire an underwriter who will start working on the bond structures, the cost to the district, and helping us with the bond financing going forward.
Thanks, Laura. Director Boyd Hodgson, I see your hand is up. Do you have a question?
I do, thank you. Yeah, I'm not sure if I should raise it physically or hit the little tab.
Either way.
You know, I know that in the past, Vallecitos has issued a resolution of intent to issue debt. And I understand from one of the constituents that there may be benefits to doing that. So, and I'm not sure if we want to discuss this now or later, but what I'd like to know is if there are in fact benefits to the district to be able to reimburse ourselves quicker if we issue resolutions, a resolution of intent to issue debt, and where that would appear in the timeline here.
I see that Doug Brown has unmuted yourself if you wanted to speak to this, but you are correct that the district has in the past issued resolution to intents, and per the instruction in our prior discussion with Wes, we are looking to do the same here. So that is for any future projects that have not already been incurred. The sooner the better, to answer your question. So the sooner we can issue those and have the board approve a resolution, the sooner those project financings can be reimbursed through the project cost of the bond financing. We can do that at the next regularly scheduled board meeting, or as well as at the time that we approve the rest of the bond documents as well.
So if I could jump in there real quick. We're actually working on the draft budget, and the resolution is going to be in accordance with the draft budget. So it's going to include the projects that are in the budget. So we've already drafted the resolution of intent to issue debt, which covers all of the projects in the CIP or comprehensive project listing. So it's already in the works, but I don't know if we really want to approve the resolution. The idea was to approve the resolution at the same time we approve the budget.
Yeah, and just to add to that, the resolution of intention to get reimbursed does not obligate the district to issue debt. It just makes it possible to get reimbursed for those projects. So it's required to get reimbursed, but it does not obligate you.
So is there any benefit to doing it even before the budget is approved?
I don't believe so, Wes or Laura.
No. Well, Laura can answer better than I can, I think, but there is no benefit to doing it before the budget's approved. The requirements are typically, and actually Doug can answer this better than me too, but it's typically 60 days after you've expended money on the project that you have to issue a resolution of intent to issue debt. And then you have, it covers up to 3 years afterwards, I believe. So, and if you haven't started any projects that you intend to issue debt for, there's no point in really issuing an intent to issue debt.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful. Regarding this timeline, where would it fall with them as the months are laid out here? Just thereabouts. Not
Sure. Go ahead,
Laura,
Wes.
yeah, sorry, I don't know if we've actually covered the dates or the timeline, but what we were thinking was, since this is the committee meeting to hopefully support the intention to issue debt, we would potentially look at going maybe on the 19th or the 2nd. Well, actually, yeah, I think the 19th is the next one. It'd be brought to maybe the 19th meeting for approval, and then from there we move forward into the 6-month process.
That's right. A typical bond issuance, as we've noted here by the month-to-month schedule, usually lasts between 4 to 5 months. Depending on the types of review processing, we can expedite some of these discussion points in some of these months. We can reduce the amount of time between sending S&P and Fitch information and getting the resulting rating. We can definitely expedite a few of these items, but generally speaking, between 4 and 5 months following the full approval.
Okay.
And that concludes the overall presentation. Happy to answer any more questions.
So I did have one thing I wanted to add that I was trying to say before, but my speakers rudely cut me off. We had talked about the budget and increasing the budgeted amount by this payment, but I'd like to just remind everyone that this debt will be issued to cover capacity projects. So if we consider and approve issuing this debt, it'll be issued for those purposes. And that being said, the debt payments were considered when setting the cap fee rate, except for when we set the cap fee rate in the cap fee model, we actually intended to issue $18 million in debt at 6% for 20 years. So the payment on that debt would have been about $1.6 million per year, and that's been incorporated into the cap fee rate. So this is actually a cheaper payment at $1.2 to $1.3 million for much more debt. So it wouldn't. So that being said, also then it wouldn't increase the budget amount. It's going in the developer fees.
So just to clear or reiterate what you just said, Wes, this is not going to be, this debt service will not be burdened by ratepayers. It'll be burdened by developers as they build.
That's correct.
Correct. And maybe to add a little to the question that Director Boyd Hodgson asked before about, are there any costs that are offset? So you may remember that with the deficit or the capacity fund shortfall, the capacity fund is paying interest on that inter-fund transfer, that loan. So that amount will go away. Once we get an infusion of cash, the inter-fund transfer goes away. So that debt service payment is zero. So there's some savings if you want to look at it that way. So that you'd look at the new debt service payment and you can effectively reduce it by what you were paying to the capacity or to the replacement fund. We can, next time we come in front of the board or the finance committee, we can share those numbers to let you know how much money the capacity fund is paying in interest costs versus what they will be paying in debt service costs. But there is that savings. They're not going to be paying both.
At this time, Glenn or Wes, what are you recommending? 25 million or 40 million?
So currently in drafting the budget, I've plugged in and done the 5-year forecast, which I'll be sharing with you hopefully at the May 6th meeting. So I've got the draft proposed budget. And in that draft proposed budget, I plugged in $28 million as the total. That gets us a little bit higher than the $25 million payment, but still much, much lower than I'll say much, still much lower than what was included in the cap fee calculation. And as you saw in the presentation, we have almost $22 million of already existing expenditures. So it provides an immediate cash infusion for the capacity fund and should, in effect, fill the deficit in full.
And then just to play devil's advocate, if we don't issue debt, then what does that mean? What does that look like?
I can actually show you, Laura, if I can take control for a second. So what I've done, and let me get my screens all oriented here. That disappeared. Okay, can you see my screen?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, this is just from the draft proposed budget. I don't want to go too much into the numbers. Like I said, we'll be talking about it at the May 6th meeting, and I know Director Boyd Hodgson hasn't seen any of the reserves yet or how that functions, so I don't want to get into the numbers. But I did want to give you a picture of the reason why we're considering issuing debt in addition to the fact that rates are at an all-time low, and that's one of the considerations. The other reason is If you look at our reserves, and this is based on the current draft proposed budget, this is what water looks like in total. So this is a combination of the replacement and capacity funds for water if we issue $28 million in debt this year in 2022. So we're above the floor, we're below the ceiling, the reserve levels are at a healthy level. But if we don't for water, so this actually goes 22 and then 26. But then if we don't for water, this is where the water reserves look because of the capacity shortfall. So it brings it down, was it like $10 million, $12 million in total? So we're much closer to the floor. So water doesn't look too bad. But if we look at sewer, these are the sewer reserves in total if we issue $28 million in debt in 2022. So you can see here we're still in between the floor and the ceiling. In 2026, we're about $10 million above the floor. If we don't issue $28 million in debt, or if we don't issue debt in 2022, sewer reserves look like this. So we have so many capital projects in both sewer replacement and sewer capacity that the sewer replacement fund can no longer afford to lend the paper money or lend money to the capacity shortfall. So what happens is in 2023, we hit the floor. 2024, we will be below the floor, which is in violation of the district's policy and would cause the need for issuing debt. So if we don't issue debt now, basically what I'm saying is we'll have to issue debt probably in 2023 to get that started. And we'll be in a position where we have to issue debt at the current terms at that time. So I'd much rather take advantage of a favorable market now with rates at record lows and issue debt than be put in a position where we have to do it in the future.
Yeah, thank you.
I have another question.
Okay.
And I appreciate that you explained that, Wes. That makes sense to me. I think one of the things that I feel like it's sort of my obligation as a board member is to try to ensure that we don't end up in this position again. So, I appreciate that we're trying to mitigate a current situation, but what I think I would like to also see, not today, obviously, but at some point, is sort of our plan to prevent this from happening again in the way that it is happening, because it's obviously not optimal.
Yeah, we certainly strive for that, but we can't sit here and guarantee that it will never happen again. And I assume by it, you meaning running into a deficit, correct? So the capacity model, the capacity fee model that we put together is based on a lot of assumptions, right? And it assumes a certain amount of development, which brings in the capital facility fees. Once an agency commits to debt, whether it's an inter-fund transfer like we're currently doing, or the issuance of bonds like we're proposing, you're committed to a repayment schedule. And if development were to stop for some reason, then the inflow of cash stops too, but the outflow continues. So it's possible, even after we borrowed money, that if development slowed down well below projections, that you could run a deficit situation again. Now, that doesn't mean that the development isn't ever going to occur. It may be a short-term slowdown. It may be a 2 or 3 year slowdown in the housing market. So revenue would slow down. You may incur a bit of a deficit, but then the revenue would pick up probably faster than you had originally predicted, and the deficit would be taken care of in that fashion. So I can't see a way to guarantee that it would never happen unless every time we went into deficit, we went out and borrowed more money. But then at the end of the day, after all the development occurred, you'd have a huge surplus in the fund.
Sure.
So, Wes, I don't know if there's anything you wanted to add to that.
Well, and while this slide looks bad, this is taking out all of the debt issuance. And keep in mind that our capacity fee model says that when we have large capacity projects, we will issue debt. So this is just pulling that out and saying, if we don't follow our plan, this is what would happen. But our plan is to issue debt with capacity projects. So that's what we're looking at now. And that's what we'll continue to do to keep the capacity fund where it's supposed to be. And once we issue this debt, if we revisit the capacity fee model, which we'll probably do in the next year or two to see if rates are sufficient, we can keep capacity in line. It's unpredictable, but we will do our best like we always do.
Understood. I guess what I'm just sort of hoping is that we can have some kind of systematic revisiting so that we can closely monitor in a systematic way at regular intervals and not let not let things go, I guess is what I'm trying to say, so that we can, so that we can have, I mean, this isn't happening completely randomly. I mean, we can predict some of it. I'm not asking for a guarantee. I'm just saying a little bit of systematic monitoring and a plan in place to do that, and doing our best to do that is, I think, would be appropriate.
Yep, we can do that.
Absolutely.
Okay, Laura, Rob, Doug, Wes, anything more you want to add in this conversation?
I have nothing to add.
Laura?
I'm all set. Thank you very much for your time.
Doug, thank you for joining us. We haven't heard from you yet. Is there anything you'd like to add, or are you good?
No, we're good. The questions about the reimbursement were good questions. And, as I said, staff has spent a lot of time, running down what can be reimbursed and making sure that things are reimbursable on a go-forward basis.
Yeah,
Okay, well, thank you all.
yeah, and Director Sinella, I would add, it's we haven't missed any opportunities. I know some constituents, some members of the community make it sound like we've missed a window of opportunity that we can't get reimbursed, and that's just not the case. We have enough projects that we can get reimbursed for, so we can go ahead and issue this debt. And this has been our plan all along. It's just now the timing is right to head into that debt issuance.
Okay.
Thank you. Very informative presentation.
And Director Sinella, we do have Gail Martin, but I did not see her hand raised. So I don't know if she doesn't want to speak or.
Okay. Oh, I see a hand now.
Okay, I'm going to allow her to talk if that's okay with you.
Sure.
Ms. Martin, go ahead.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes.
Yes, I very much appreciate the presentation and forward-looking. The reason why I raised my hand earlier was because I could not hear Wes at all. And I'm very glad to see that his speaker has been restored so that we all can hear what he has to say. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. So if there's nothing else, thank you, Laura, for the presentation, and the team for joining us today. And we'll go on to item number 2 on the cost of service.
Thank you all.
Thank you very
Thanks,
much.
Laura.
Thank
Thanks,
you all.
Robert. Thanks,
You're
Doug.
welcome. Good afternoon, everybody.
All right, we were off by 2 minutes. So we asked our next consultant to join us at 2:45. It looks like we're almost right on schedule. So the second
Right
item,
on schedule.
I'm sorry?
Right on schedule.
Right on schedule, yeah. So our second item is a cost of service study update. The board had approved a cost of service study last year sometime, I believe it was, and started it, but COVID got in the way. So we kind of put a temporary pause or slowdown on it so that we can understand the impacts of COVID. So as we've gotten a better handle on the finances associated with COVID, and we seem to be coming out of the COVID situation, it's probably time to spend more attention on the cost of service study update. So I'm going to turn it over to Wes, and he can introduce our guests today, who are going to kind of walk us through where we are with the cost of service study, and then we'd love to answer any questions the committee members may have. So Wes?
So hopefully you can still hear me. My mic's still working. That'd be a bonus. So as you know, we've been working on the cost of service study for a while. General Manager Pruitt mentioned that it's been going on since I think it was June 2020, and so we've made progress during that time. It has been kind of put on hold, but we do have some updates to provide to the committee and the board. And I don't want to steal anybody's thunder, so I'll let Mr. John Wright from Raftellus give updates. And Arisha is here as well. She's been helping us out a ton. I don't want to leave her out in the introductions. So John, with that, if you'd like to talk about the cost service study.
Terrific. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
If your screen is the water cost of service study update screen, then yes.
It is.
Okay.
Well, thank you for having Arisha and I here this afternoon to give you a little update about the study. As Wes and Glenn have both indicated, it's been going on for a while, and COVID really has thrown a monkey wrench into utility schedules on all sorts of things. And so it's not unusual that it's kind of upset the schedule just a little bit here on this water cost of service study. What Arisha and I would like to do today is just give you a little background on the cost of service study, sort of generically, and then tell you what the status is of the study right now, and talk a little bit about rate structure design issues. And then I think Wes and I will wrap it up with sort of a tentative next steps schedule.
And John, if I could interrupt you for just a second.
Of course.
Sorry about that. I just wanted to say, for the benefit of Director Boyd Hodgson, I know that you haven't been involved in the process. So that's why we want to start off with what a cost of service study is and what a rate model is and how it relates to a cost of service study. So hopefully we'll give you some background on what we've done previously before we get going on the moving forward part. So, and Director Sanella, so you know, the cost of service study will be in conjunction with the budget. So this is something we're going to give you an update today. And then as we go through the budget process, we'll show you how the two work together, how rates will be set, and we'll keep you informed during that whole process about, you know, what the rates may or may not be. So the board is always informed, and that should start at the May 6th meeting when we do the draft proposed budget. So sorry, John. Sorry, John, I didn't mean to steal you. So you can go ahead. Thank you, John.
So, you know, a question that often comes up, which is a good question, because unless you live in this world, you know, you might not be 100% familiar with it. What is cost of service? So we are here in California, obviously, and municipal utility rates in California are governed by Proposition 218. And, you know, Proposition 218 requires us to charge customers rates that are where the cost that we're recovering from customers are fully aligned with the costs they impose on our system. And when we think about a water utility, in this context, the Vallecitos water utility, we know that different types of customers on the system cause us to incur different costs because different types of customers have different usage patterns. So we might see on the Vallecitos system, for example, that customers at a particular meter size might impose peak demand costs on the system that other customers don't. And a peak demand cost we can think of as primarily being usage during the outdoor irrigation season that's very intense water usage. And we might see customers imposing on our system maximum day and maximum hour peak demands that are higher than some other customers might. So customers across our utility system have different demand characteristics. They impose different costs on our system. And what cost of service allows us to do is to try to estimate those costs and develop rates that recover from each appropriate customer group the costs they impose on our system. And, you know, this is done all over the country. It's an underlying principle of not only water, but electric and natural gas and sewer service. And the goal is to make sure that each customer type pays rates that are appropriate and that they're not underpaying or overpaying. And so we try to minimize subsidies as much as we can. And really, cost of service is a requirement in California under Prop 218. So when we think about the cost of service study process, at least in the Vallecitos Water District context, you know, the first step in the process is a step that Wes is working on right now as he prepares for your FY22 budget, which is to look at your costs projected for FY22, both operating and capital costs that you're going to be paying. And he will answer the question, how much rate revenues do we need to collect from customers in order to keep our utility in sound financial condition in FY22. And that's known as the revenue requirement determination process. And once we know the level of revenue on sort of a total system basis that we need to recover from all of our customers, and this is rate revenue, we go into a cost of service process. Another way of describing it might be a cost allocation process, where we look at the types of demands different customers impose on our system, and we allocate that FY22 revenue requirement to customers based on the demands and costs they impose on our system. And of course, that is an underlying requirement of Prop 218. And Wes and Michael and Arisha and myself have been doing quite a bit of work over the past few months, especially going through a really detailed cost allocation process. And then once we have allocated our revenue requirement to specific types of customers, for example, the tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 revenue requirement for Vallecitos, which I promise we'll see momentarily, we can develop rates. And our rates really are of two types: commodity-based rates that customers pay for usage and how much water they actually use and are billed for. And then also a readiness to serve charge, which is Vallecitos' nomenclature for a monthly fixed charge. So this is the process. How much revenue do you need? How do you allocate it? And then how do you design rates to recover that level of revenue? So I have two little animations here, and hopefully you won't think they're too corny, but if you picture the big gray bucket on top there, let's consider that our FY22 revenue requirement. And so what the cost of service process does is it begins to answer questions like, well, how much of that revenue requirement is associated with water supply costs we have to purchase, or water we have to purchase from, for example, San Diego County Water Authority? How much of those costs are associated with delivering water over our system at a base or average annual day basis? How much of those costs are related to meeting peak demands in outdoor irrigation season? And those along with any conservation costs would be how we determine our commodity or volumetric revenue requirement. Then over on the far right, we also have our fixed charge, once again in Vallecitos nomenclature, our readiness to serve charge, which is typically consists of two components: maintaining and operating meters on your system and providing customer service. So kind of an animation to show that bucket of total revenue requirement divvied up to various components. Then this second slide, which I've just noted may not be an animation, is just how we arrive over on the far right, our commodity rate, or in this context, it's called a volumetric rate on this slide, which is $1 per HCF amount applied to billed consumption. And it's a combination of the unit cost of supply. Once again, these are all expressed on dollar HCF basis. The unit cost of meeting base demand, the unit cost of meeting peak demand, and the unit cost of conservation. So let's get into a little bit about the background of the actual study now that we've done that introduction and what the status is. So my firm, Raftellus, was retained in June 2020 to assist the district with this study. And we basically had two primary charges. Charge number one was to conduct a cost of service study to establish your fiscal year 22 water rates, both commodity rates and your fixed readiness to serve charge. And we wanted to look at those FY22 rates, one, under your existing rate structure, which were I promise we're going to look at, and then consider a couple rate structure alternatives. Another important charge and what the district wanted Raftellus to do, which we've really been working with Wes and his team on, is developing a Microsoft Excel rate model that is as straightforward and as user-friendly as possible so that you'll have the basis for developing rates in the future with a model that everybody can understand.
Just before you go on to the next slide, can I get a little bit of historical context? The cost of service study, I understand that Mr. Wright, your firm was retained in June 2020. Is this typically how Vallecitos has been developing their rates? Or, when was the last time we did this before? When was the last time we did a cost of service study to figure out a rate structure before we retained your firm in 2020?
I believe, and I'm going to ask Wes or Glenn to jump in here, but I believe that Vallecitos retained the services of a engineering firm named Black & Veatch. And I think Black & Veatch was retained in roughly 2014, 2015 to do a cost of service study for the district. And the district then in approximately 2017 conducted a cost of service study using its own personnel. You did not have a consultant assist you, and you did a very comprehensive study using your own staff. And then you're right, Raftellus was retained by the district to develop rates for fiscal year 2021. Although that particular study, I think was, and Wes, jump in here if I'm misstating, those 2021 rates were based on just your existing rate structure without any consideration of alternatives. Now what the district has done for this current study and the development of FY 2022 rates is to try to really look in detail and do a top to bottom look at all of your cost allocations, all of your revenue requirement components, and consider alternatives, as well as developing this brand new rate model. So over the past 4 or 5 years, there's been a lot going on in Vallecitos as it relates to water cost of service.
Thank you.
Well, what's our status? I'm not sure that these 2 bullet points sum it up, but we're going to get into it in more detail. One of the things that Glenn and Wes, I think very wisely, had Raftellus do in September of last year was make a presentation to the board where we solicited the board's input on what the board considers important in terms of your water rate structure. And as an outcome of that, we began to formulate what we think alternatives might be that coincided with the board's preferred rate structure alternatives. So here's a summary of what the board developed in September 2020. And what we have listed, obviously on the left, are various rate design, pricing / policy objectives. And I think the way we develop these 8 objectives is Raftellus, my firm, really sat down and put our thinking caps on with Wes and Glenn and identified what they at the staff level felt were really important objectives. And then we presented this to the board, and the board went through a scoring exercise kind of on real time with Raftellus in order to rank what they consider to be the most important objectives associated with a water rate structure. Now, I want to make 2 things very, very clear about this. However, it's not really a however, but it's just additional information. The fact that you see something ranked very, very high, in this case, affordability for essential uses or affordability for low customer bills, that does not mean Vallecitos currently has a problem with affordability. So that's point number one. Wouldn't necessarily draw any conclusions about whether existing rate structure is problematic in any one of these areas. Secondarily, the fact that something might be ranked lowest priority, cost of service equity or drought management, the fact that it's ranked low does not mean it does not mean that it is not an important thing. I think when we look at a rate structure, we want to, as much as possible, have a rate structure that's conducive to achieving all of these objectives. Now, there are always some balancing and some trade-offs. But I think it is perhaps interesting to look at what the board thought in September of last year. Wes or Glenn, did you have anything you wanted to add to this slide?
No, I don't think so. I think the trick, and John may talk about this later, is we need to make sure that all these are balanced within the confines of Proposition 218. So for example, if drought management was a big thing, we can't just say, hey, we're going to use it to discourage overconsumption. We're going to use a rate structure to discourage it, because Prop 218 kind of frowns on that. So these are objectives and guidelines, but the law is what really governs. So John, I don't know if you're going to talk about that later, but I wanted to say that.
No, that's a really good point. The Prop 218 world is absolutely objective, number one, let's put it this way. We need to make sure we have adequate revenue to sustain your utility operations, maintain the financial integrity of your utility, and we want to earn those revenues with fully Prop 218 compliant rates. So this is a little summary of what you saw on the previous slide. You know, most of the directors felt that affordability for essential indoor use, as well as for customers with average bill, was extremely important. In general, the board felt there was important to make sure that customers understand their rate structure. And if that sounds like an obvious thing that doesn't even need to be said, there are utilities that often try to implement rate structures that are so complex that customers don't understand them until they get experience with them over several years. So customer understanding is really a very important thing. And then the board also had, consensus on the importance of making sure that we equitably allocate water supply costs across our commodity rates. And just by way of very quick background, the district basically has three sources of water that it purchases. San Diego County Water Authority provides treated water to the district. Live-in-Hain Municipal Water District is another supplier of water. And then also from San Diego County Water Authority, the district purchases an amount of water from the Carlsbad desalinization plant. And every one of those water supply sources has a different cost per acre foot associated with it. Okay, so where are we right now as of today? Well, and I'll let Wes tell us if he agrees with this, but I think we have arrived at a rating model that Wes and Michael feel fairly good about. It's straightforward. We think it's easy to use and easy to update. And we think it allows Wes to really look at different rate structures and do some rate design scenario planning. We have calculated fiscal year 2022 rates under your existing rate structure. We are not going to show those to you today because we would consider them preliminary in nature. but we'll see later on, I think, when Wes feels we might be able to unveil those to you. And then finally, we have done quite a bit of work looking at a couple of rate structure alternatives. So let's talk about rate structures. And I see that this slide is a little bit fuzzy. I apologize to you all about that, but the existing Vallecitos rate structure is, as mentioned previously, composed of commodity charges on the left of the slide and fixed charges, your monthly readiness to serve fixed charge on the right. And you have a meter size based water rate structure. And meter size rate structures like this are common. And you have 3 tiers. And so customers at whatever meter size, the amount of water they get in each tier is defined by how large their meter is. And they pay a volumetric rate. So it's actually relatively straightforward. And then similarly, on the far right, you see your readiness to serve charges, your fixed charges. Those are monthly charges that vary by meter size. And this is obviously your current structure. Now, in pondering alternative rate structures with Wes and Michael over the past few months, one of the things that we have looked at is right now your tier 1 consumption threshold for 5/8 inch and 3/4 inch meter sizes is 1 to 6 HCF. And bear with me, I just want to go back to that slide and ask you to look on the left. Once again, it's a little bit fuzzy, but currently, if you're a 5/8 inch or 3/4 inch customer, tier 1, which we would associate with non-discretionary indoor water consumption or essential use consumption, you're charged the lowest rate, the tier 1 rate, for any usage between 1 to 6 100 cubic foot increments. So one of the things we have explored and continue to explore is increasing that tier 1 threshold from 6 HCF at the top end to 9 HCF. Now, in theory, what that does is it provides smaller customers, single-family residential customers primarily, with a larger amount of tier 1 consumption to be billed at a lower rate. And so we've definitely been looking at that. The advantages of doing that in the middle part of the slide is that I think it would potentially provide a modest level of rate relief, i.e. a lower rate per HCF for customers in tier 1. Interestingly, I'll tell you, as we've all modeled this, Raftelis and your finance team, we've seen that actually moving from 6 HCF at the tier 1 top end to 9 HCF doesn't really have quite the rate impact we thought it would. And another potential disadvantage of doing this is that if you're a customer that had larger than a 3/4 inch meter, let's say a 1.5 inch meter, but you had a low amount of consumption, you didn't use very much water, your consumption wouldn't increase in tier 1. And that would not allow you to receive any relief like customers in the 5/8, 3/4 inch meter size would. But this alternative rate structure number 1, I guess just to sum it up, is a modification of your existing rate structure that's not an overwhelmingly earth-shattering big change. Now, another alternative that we have looked at is a rate structure that's based around customer classes. And so currently, when you think of your rate structure, you don't really have a quote single family residential or commercial industrial or governmental or multifamily residential customer classes. Your classes are all defined by meter sizes. So it is possible to implement a rate structure that's not based on meter sizes, but it's based on these customer class definitions. And just as your existing rate structure based on meter sizes is very common, nothing unusual about it, it's also common to have rate structures that are based on customer classes. And you can see in the middle bullet under the advantage, I'm not sure it's an advantage, but this is just noting that those types of rate structures are common in California. And in theory, an advantage of going to a customer class-based system is that it may result in a more closer alignment between cost of service and eventual commodity rate outcomes than your current meter size-based approach. And I don't know if this is a disadvantage, but Wes and Michael and Raftelis are still really looking at this and really trying to make sure that we've got our cost allocations and our demand forecast all in alignment to see really how things would differ under this customer class-based approach. Now,
I have a quick question before you move on. Just for my benefit, can you define what you mean by cost of service equity? How are you using that? What do you mean by that?
Yeah, here's a good way to think of it is, let's say a utility has a $40 million annual total system revenue requirement, and that $20 million of that 40 needs to be recovered from single-family residential customers based on their demand characteristics. So 40 total, 20 needs to be recovered from single-family. Well, if you have rates that only recover $15 million from single-family instead of 20, that means single-family residential is being subsidized by other types of customers. Similarly, if you should have recovered 20 million from single-family, but you have rates that cause them to pay 25, that means they are subsidizing other customers. And so cost of service equity is doing the best job we can to estimate how much of your total system revenue requirement should be paid by each class. And finally, even though I walked through that maybe overly detailed answer, there's no insinuation whatsoever on the Vallecitos system that there are big cross subsidies going on. So please don't misinterpret.
I had a question about the class structure. So for the water agencies that do have that structure in place, what's a typical number of classes that they would have? I would think that would be challenging, right? To try to put a meter is a meter, right? So if they have a 3/4 meter, that's a 3/4 meter. There's no debating that. But is there a lot of debate about who should be in what classes, who qualifies to be in a government class or a retail class? Or
that's a great question. And I think the answer is no, there's generally not a lot of debate. And so here are the classes you would normally see. You would normally see single-family residential customers in one class. And single-family residential customers, even though some of them may have large lots, some of them may have small lots, if you were to look at the profile of single-family residential customers over a 12-month period, they all have a summer peak because single-family customers water their yards in the irrigation season. So that's one class. A second class you see that's very, very common is multifamily residential customers. And Multifamily usage is primarily indoor usage. And the reason it's primarily indoor usage is that most water utilities that have a class-based system have irrigation only class. And so you might have a multifamily property that has common area outdoor watering, common area where kids can play or whatever, but that is billed through an irrigation only tap. So most multifamily is indoor. And then in addition to the irrigation only, you would see a commercial and industrial class. Now, depending on the demographics of the utility in question, you could have more classes, but it's generally single family, multifamily, irrigation only, and commercial industrial. And it's not really that difficult to assign customers to classes like that because there is somewhat of a commonality in the profile of their demand characteristics.
Okay, thank you.
So when we think about your existing rate structure, we are currently working through some pretty interesting things with the existing rate structure, in addition to increasing the tier 1 threshold for smaller meter sizes from 1 to 6 up to 1 to 9. In addition to looking at that, we're looking at how we can use our dollars that we receive from property taxes. And Wes, I may need to have you jump in here and talk a little bit about that property tax offset, what it is, where it stems from. Would you be willing to do that momentarily?
Actually, I think Mike has more knowledge about that than me. Mike, if you wouldn't mind jumping in on that one.
Sure. Right now, we're still waiting for to see where everything fills out. But property tax revenue is a general fund revenue. So with a typical cost allocation method for a cost of service study, like Mr. Wright mentioned, you can't have subsidies. You can't have one class or one size meter paying what another class or another size meter should be paying. However, with property tax, we're still getting a final legal opinion on it, is we can use some of the property or all of the property tax money to offset certain meter sizes or certain types of customers. So that is an advantage that we can, if you wanted to target the tier 1 users to make the low user bill a little bit less, we can potentially use some of the property tax money to offset the revenue requirement. John mentioned the revenue requirement, little buckets that go in. So we could use that to offset some of the money that is needed to recoup from those type of customers.
And just to, sorry, John, just to clarify a little bit, the property tax would be actually a general revenue. We don't want to say general fund, just to be careful, because
sorry,
yeah, it's okay. We got.
You're right, Wes. It's a general revenue.
It's a general revenue. We, as an enterprise fund, we don't have a general fund. Just to clarify on that.
Unrestricted.
Exactly, and I believe we've confirmed this with our attorneys as well. So that came from discussion with BB&K. So John, back to you.
Yeah, no, thank you. So one of the things we've been doing is looking at the application of our property tax revenues and how to offset purchased water costs from different tiers. Now, notice the second bullet: develop tier widths for meter sizes greater than or equal to 3 inches. I'm going to ask you to bear with me because I'm going to have to back up several slides, but I want to show you what we're talking about. Once again, it's a little bit fuzzy, but if you focused on the commodity charges on the left, and you went down to the line that says 3 inches and larger, what you can see is that the tier 1 threshold is from 1 to 438 CF, to 431 to 1190. And then tier 3 begins at a greater than 1190 HCF. Notice that it's 3 inches and larger. We don't have right now in the current rate structure consumption tiers for 4 inch, 6 inch, 8 inch. And so what you'll see is that some of our larger meter size customers may find themselves with the vast majority of their consumption considered tier 3 consumption. So one of the things we're looking at doing is developing tier widths for those customers that are 3 inches or more. Another thing that we've done in our current model, and I don't want to tell you all how many model iterations we're up to, but it's a lot. But something that I think we're starting to feel really good about is when you think about the water rates you charge your customers, they're heavily defined by what you have to pay San Diego County Water Authority and Livenhain Municipal Water District each year for water supply. And one of the things that many utilities in California do, not only California, but other parts of the country, is when they adopt water rates under the Prop 218 process, is they can identify costs that are so-called pass-through costs that they can adjust on an annual basis as the costs imposed by your water supply agencies go up. As San Diego County or Livenhain increase their rates they're charging you. And so our current model is developed to allow us to identify those pass-throughs. And then finally, one of the other things we're really looking at is the development potentially of an irrigation-only rate. For those customers you have on your system that are pure irrigation-only customers. So I promise you there's a lot of work being done, and we've got a pretty neat model that we're coming to. So where might our next steps be from a timing perspective? And Wes, if you'd be willing, I would rather have you address this slide.
Sure, I'll give it a shot. So, directors, as I mentioned, we're developing the draft proposed budget, and the goal is to have the cost of service study be in conjunction with that. So as we talk about rates, rate increases, you're kept informed and participating along the way. So we've already incorporated the draft proposed budget, what we've developed so far, which is preliminary, into the cost of service study. And we do have a nice working rate model now that we're able to link directly to the budget. Mike's updated his demand numbers for the year. And from there, we will look at the rate structure analysis and where rates might go. And as we present the budget to the board, we'll bring those rate structures and hopefully the alternatives in the future to the board and give you the examples so that you can give us direction on whether you'd like to continue with the current rate structure or possibly change to a customer class or other alternative. But once we've developed and approved the budget, hopefully the rates will be clear to everybody and everybody will be communicating fully. And we'll approve the budget, and around the same time we can, if it's not with the budget, it'll be either shortly thereafter we'll approve the rates as well. And then after the rates are approved, of course, we have to do the Prop 218 notice, the Prop 218 hearing, and then we will approve rates before they potentially change on January 1st.
Yeah, and I would add and maybe reinforce what Wes said is that the rates are always done in conjunction with the budget, but not necessarily at the same time as the budget. So we'll try to make it clear when we go through the budget adoption process. We'll say if the board adopts this budget, our preliminary results indicate that rates will have to go up by, and we'll give you some general average. It's hard to give one number because we don't just do across the board rate increases. That would probably be a violation of Prop 218. So we usually index something like the typical single family homeowners, just so the board knows that, hey, if I adopt this budget, I should be expecting in the coming months as we go through the Prop 218 process to adopt rates that have maybe a 3% or whatever increase on that class of customer.
Yeah.
So
Glenn, I'm so glad you said that. It's such an important point, and apologize for jumping around again, but board members, I want you to know that we're not going to just drop tables that look like this on you. with whatever the tier widths come out to be and whatever the dollar per HCF. What we're going to have for you are estimates of what it means in terms of bills for customers at different meter sizes, or as Glenn just indicated, single family residential, because we never want you to be in the dark being asked to approve something without you having a feel for what it means on a bill impact basis, across a fairly wide spectrum of customers. So Glenn, thank you for noting that.
I'm glad you clarified that. That was going to be something that I would want to see at the presentation. I think it's also important to bear in mind that when we look at, for example, slide 15 that you keep showing with the tables with the different tier structures, what I think would also be helpful is understanding the percentage of customers that are allocated to each of these meter sizes if we're going to look at, the meter sizes. So I would like to have that information together too. I know that Mr. Arthur has that information. I'd just like to see it pulled together. It would also be helpful to see scenarios, to see you run a case, like a case study almost. Like if we went with the class structure overview, your single family resident based on average usage, they would see a bill increase of XYZ. And here's another case study. This is your typical business customer that has a 2-inch pipe, and you have X number of those in the district. They're going to see an increase that looks like this if we went with the tier structure or if we went with the class structure. So I think just having it as sort of explicit and transparent as possible would be really helpful in, when we are deliberating about whether or not which rate structure to adopt, and of course, whether or not to adopt a rate increase.
Absolutely. And so I think that's really well stated. And that is absolutely our intent for you. You see a 3-inch meter that maybe has a $338 monthly fixed charge versus currently $36.55 for a 5/8-inch meter. We want you to know why that's the case. And under the alternatives that we present to you, we very much want to be transparent in terms of bill impacts. So that is exactly what we're planning on doing for you.
Yeah, and Director Boyd Hodgson, in line with what you said, in years past, what we've tried to do for the board is even within a particular type of customer, like the typical single family customer, we'll say, hey, if that customer uses 13 units of water a month, this is what their bill will be compared to last year's bill. But we'll also look and say, hey, if they're a low user and they only use 6 units, what would their bill be compared to last year? And what if they use a lot of water, like 40 units? So we try to give the board, not just by customer class, but even within that customer or meter size group, to see what impacts the proposed rates will have on those customers compared to where they are at today. Because in our experience, that's what customers respond mostly to, is the change. So, I'm paying this rate, I use this much water and I pay this much. What am I going to pay in the future if you adopt these new rates? So we try to do everything we can to explain to the customers what the impacts of the change in rate structure will be on their particular bill.
And I think it would be also really helpful to have that as part of the board packet sent out beforehand, so that I'm not looking at that for the first time in the 2-hour meeting that we have and being asked to make a decision about that, so that I can digest it.
Yeah, that process, the 218 process, will be multiple steps. It won't be one meeting and asking the board to adopt rates. It'll be multiple times leading up to the public hearing, the required public hearing by Proposition 218, where the customers can come in and voice their opinion on the rates. But the board will be kept fully apprised of those.
Hey guys, thank you for the presentation, and I think we have a good path forward. I had a question though. We focused today on the commodity piece of this, but we didn't talk about the fixed charges. Is that just because it's going to be another presentation for another time, or is that just we're not addressing the fixed charges as part of this process? And I ask that because my 7 years on the board now, I've probably gotten more questions about the fixed charges than I have the commodity, and a lot of not a lot, but some customers, they'll raise the question. They'll say, even if I don't turn my water on, maybe I'm on vacation for the entire month, and my bill's still 70, $72, $73, even if I don't use a drop of water. And I think most of them understand it's they're paying for that ready to serve, and it's like your cable TV that the cable company still has to put the satellite into space, and even if you don't watch the TV, there's still a monthly bill just to have access to the TV 24/7, just like we're providing access to water 24/7. But it can be confusing. Are we going to be addressing the fixed charges or reevaluating what we charge at all as part of this process?
Well, the answer is yes. And maybe in retrospect, I should have placed more emphasis on it. But one of the things Wes and Michael have really done with Raftellus is we look at each one of your budgetary line items, or put another way, the components of your revenue requirement. We're really asking ourselves the question, is this a cost that we consider fixed in nature that should be recovered through your monthly readiness to serve charge? Or is it a cost that's more appropriately recovered through your commodity rates? So I think we want to be transparent for the board, and therefore by your customers and other stakeholders, regarding how we arrive at the fixed charge, what costs are in it, and then also how we arrived at the scaling upwards that you see by meter size. So it is by no means something that's being ignored in the work we're currently doing.
Okay,
Real
so
quick, if you can go
there's
back.
there's more to come on that?
Yes, sir, I believe so.
Yeah, not
Okay.
in today's meeting, but.
Yeah, no, I understand, but it's going to come eventually.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you. I don't have any other questions. Are there any questions from the public, or do any of the other participants today have any questions?
Miss Martin does have her hand up.
Okay.
All right, I'll unmute her. Miss Martin, go ahead.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, ma'am.
Very good. I wanted to ask, please, on the fixed charges. My HOA, which is 330 homes, we have a 4-inch pipe, but we are considered commercial, and we are charged the 505 monthly ready to serve fixed fee, when in fact we are residential. And I wanted to ask, what is the process where we connect with the board of directors to try to reevaluate our classification?
Okay.
Did you want me to try to answer that, President?
Go for it. I think I understand the confusion, but go for it.
Yeah, well, I guess I would say there's a couple of answers to that. Is one, under our existing rate structure, it doesn't matter whether you're commercial or residential, you have a 4-inch meter. So that's what that meter gets charged. If the question is if we were to look at by customer class, then it's probably a more relevant question, because then we can put customers in a different customer class if we felt it was better reflected the demands that they place on the system.
Hey, Glenn, I had a question about that too, though. I think Ms. Martin mentioned that they had about 330 units in her neighborhood. Is that 4-inch meter servicing all 330 units that are in her neighborhood? Thus, the $506 is being divided by 330?
Yeah, I don't know specifically where Ms. Martin lives, but generally that would be the case. A meter size services a number of units. They may have multiple meters for all I know. Sometimes you may have 3 or 4 4-inch meters servicing. It depends on the number of units in there. But you're right, that would be not per customer, obviously. It's for the number for that meter. And then depending how they're billed, that gets divided. So in a case of a multifamily housing, we typically, the customer is the landlord or the property management firm, the owner of the complex. It's not the residents. So we would bill the owner of record, which let's say it's a property manager. In Ms. Martin's case, we would bill them the $505 for the meter. How the property manager recovers those costs from their tenants is between them and their tenants. And we don't get involved in that aspect of their billing, either on the commodity side or on the fixed side of things.
Okay, but just doing some simple math, I suspect there's probably more than one 4-inch meter that's serving the neighborhood. But per 4-inch meter, it would be about $1.53. So even if they had 4 of them, it's still not. It's still significantly less than your typical single family home would pay. So the only reason why I'm bringing that up is we don't want to. I want to help the customer and answer their question and explore other possibilities, but I don't think we want to go down the avenue of putting them on like an individual meter. I think that would only raise their rates by hundreds of percent, maybe even 1,000%.
Yeah, and I would point out on this chart that John's sharing right now, right underneath the 10-inch line on the right side, it says multiple units, initial unit charged per above. But so let's take that example, the 4-inch meter, I'm sorry, 4-inch meter was $505. But then for each unit, in addition to the first unit, another $10 is charged. So if there was, say, 300 units in there, there'd be another $3,000 per month on top of the 505.
Oh, okay, I gotcha.
And then that's the total bill. So they would, in that example I gave, it would be about a $3,500 monthly ready to serve charge, and then how their landlord or property manager divvies those costs up, whether it's a separate charge or part of the rent. That's the part we never see, and we're not. It's not part of our relationship with the customer.
Yeah, I think we have to be careful. I appreciate what President Sanella said about potentially lowering the rates, but I'm not sure that that's knowable because we don't know what that relationship is with how they recover the costs.
I mean, every party that you have in the process, there's going to be at least a minimal administrative cost that's going to be applied, I would imagine. And so that's just one example of how it could be different than what we have.
I will say that I'm not an expert on this, but there is some pending legislation that is going to limit the ability of property managers and building owners with multiple tenants to pass along costs in excess of what they're charged by the public utility. So in my example, if it's $3,500 that gets charged to the property manager, they're not supposed to collect more than that. The legislation may allow for a minor administrative fee, like President Sanella mentioned, but it's not supposed to be a profit center for the property manager.
Okay, I see that Ms. Martin's hand is up. I don't know if that's just still up from before or if there's a follow-up question, but if there is, I'm open to entertaining it.
Yeah, I don't see her hand up in mine, but I'd be happy to ask her again if you'd like.
Sure.
Ms. Martin, did you have anything else you wanted to add?
Nope. Okay, her hand came down on mine, so.
Good.
Okay.
Okay, John, was there anything else you wanted to add?
No, sir. Hopefully this was useful to you, and we are making progress. So thank you very much for having us today.
Yeah, thank you. Wes, is there anything you wanted to say in closing from the staff perspective?
I think we've covered just about everything. Thank you, John and Arisha. We appreciate your time.
Okay, take care.
Thank you.
Thank you both for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
Yep.
Ms. Martin's hand went up again, President Sanella.
Okay. Well, we're at that point in the agenda where we're doing public comment. So let's go ahead and conclude our meeting with another round of public comment.
Okay. Ms. Martin, did you want to was there something else you wanted to say?
Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes.
Yes, I tried to speak earlier, but I didn't have time to unmute. But I want to say, just for your information, my ready to serve charge every month is $13.
Okay.
So that gives you a guideline of how the management of our community is taking advantage of us. We are not seeing the exact cost, and the management firm is making money on us. This is a profit for them. Thank you.
It may be because Glenn, you said that there was $10 plus the $1.53, so that puts us around $11.53. And so is $2 administrative reasonable? I mean, who knows, but it's not significant, right? I mean, it's not like it's not like going from $2 to $10.
Yeah, and if there was
or $13.
if there was a second 3-inch meter out there, that would explain all of it. But I don't know the specifics of where.
Yeah. No, it's interesting. I hear that too. I go to a lot of, well, before COVID, I would go to a lot of the mobile home parks in our service area on a regular basis and meet with them. And they're most, at least the ones in my area, they're the same way where they have, one line going into the park and then they don't get their bills from Vallecitos. And so I've had a lot of them kind of vent to me and with frustrations about that third party interaction. Unfortunately, there's not a whole lot we can do about it, but it's certainly there. I think some of it is just confusion, but some of it might be, legitimate concerns.
All right, I think that's all staff had for the committee today.
Okay, great. Well, thank you, everybody. It was a valuable and productive meeting, and thank you for those in the public who joined us. And everybody have a nice evening.
All right, thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you.
everyone.
Bye-bye.
Great presentation. Thank you.
Good night.